Hey, welcome to week 10. Uh, this has been a pretty quick semester. We've been rolling through lots of time. Well, it's been quick for me. It's probably been arduous for you, and if so, I apologize for that. But it has been quick. I've tried to cover a lot of material in a little bit of time, and this week will be no exception. This is sort of a milestone week, I think, in that week 10, at this point, we're beyond all of the stuff that's required for the first three assignments. All right, so the past 2 weeks, 8 and 9, we were dealing with the DOM, and that's assignment 3, and now we're on to our final projects. You guys are finishing up, probably at this point, finishing up assignment 3 and looking ahead toward how exactly you're going to attack this final. And I completely understand that. The next few weeks are going to give you some hopefully some good material with which you may decide to go in one direction or the other. You're probably not going to be able to go in all of these directions for the final. And to that end, I want to give an overview of things like, this week we'll be talking about data, JSON, how you handle a JSON file and how you query an API to get some information from the web and what all is involved with that. But we could probably spend a semester on data visualization. And I'm going to give you this little, inch deep exposure to what we can do. But if your final is dependent on a little bit more involved data querying or data wrangling and data visualization, what I'm going to do with these next videos is, as you know, this class mirrors the course that Dan Schiffman has been teaching at NYU's ITP program, and his videos for the next few weeks are great. They're also in depth. I think for the data section in API, he's probably got 4 or 5 hours worth of video. Now, if you're not going in the direction of a data API type thing for your final, you may or may not want to watch all 5 hours worth of that material, but I think that the exposure I'm going to give you today, which is probably at least an hour, if not more, worth of what's involved in using data APIs. That some sort of alarms going on. I'm sorry if you guys can hear that. I don't know what that actually means, but we'll keep going. Anyway. I think there's a truck in my driveway, so apologies if I have to. Hang on a second. Yeah, there was a truck in my driveway. I'm sorry about that. I have already restarted this video twice. I'm not going to do it 3 times. I apologize. Anyway, I'm going to chug along. I don't know where we were. I think that what I was going to say is I'm going to hopefully give you a really good hour worth of digestible material on how JSON data and APIs work. If you're into digging deeper, I'm going to dovetail what I'm doing very closely with what Dan Schiffman has on his YouTube channel. I'm going to link to his YouTube channel for this week. I think he has 11 or 12 videos, each about 20 minutes long or so. So there's a lot more that you can dig into. He goes a little bit more slowly probably than I'm going to go in this lesson, which is all good. If you need that, if you need this component for your final, you probably want to watch Dan's stuff. You should watch it anyway. He's funny. He's also an exceptional teacher. But if not, if you're thinking of something else and you're trying to keep up with the lessons, thank you for being here, and let's dig in. So what I'm going to do today, the first lesson that we're going to handle now is going to be how we can load a JSON data file. What's JSON anyway, right? Well, I just wrote this on the board here. You already know what it is. Whether or not we spoke about it earlier in the semester, I think I hinted at it, but way back in week 2, we did something like, we made a circle object, right, that we enclosed in our curly braces, and we had this circle object which we assigned to a variable called circle. It had key value pairs for its diameter and its x location and y location. And then we learned that we could access the data inside this object by using our dot notation. So we could say circle dot diameter, and that would yield the value 100. This here is pretty much a JSON object. There are some semantic differences that are a little bit different. The main one being that if you have a JSON file, all of the keys, the key properties would have quotes on them, around them. That's probably one of the biggest differences, but we don't really need to know all those, those particulars. Just know that what we're about to do is really similar to what we've done before. Now the file might be a little bit more bulky. It's going to be a little bit bigger because we're going to have, hundreds or thousands of data points in this big giant file, but we're still going to get to them, to these individual values of interest to us, by using our dot notation. Or another notation which I'll show you called bracket notation, which is sort of like, well, you'll see, I'll show you. Let's go over to the code, okay? All right, so we've got here for lesson 1, I am going to load an external data file from a site that I'm using. I found this site that just has a bunch of really cool data files that you can use for this kind of activity. I'll actually go over to our website here, our own Canvas site, and I've linked it in lesson 10 for you. Week 10, list of pre-baked JSON data files you can download. Okay, so if you go here and you click through, on GitHub here, this Corpora site, which Dan Schiffman will use in some of his videos too. He's going to use different files than I'm using. But you can see that there are all sorts of topics where, whether you're interested in animals or architecture or medicine or music or whatever, there are some files. You want to go into religion, you can get a data file on a list of Christian saints, I guess, which if I click through, you can see this data object, right? This is a JSON file with a bunch of information. You can see, what are we starting with here? We've got an array of a bunch of objects, right? So this is one object, and it's a saint object. Abba Dieu of Antony, I guess. He, was a 4th century saint, blah, blah, blah. There's a bazillion of them, right? So you can see that this file is huge. It's nearly 7,000 lines of holy data, but with a couple of the same fundamentals that we've been using all along, we can wrangle this thing and do stuff with whatever it is we want to do. And that's what I'm going to do. I actually decide I like to play guitar poorly, but I still like it. And so one of the things that I looked at, I was interested in music, and I found this list of guitar manufacturers, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this data, and you'll see that in GitHub there are these buttons that you can that do different things. Don't need to get into a GitHub demo, but the one thing that you probably will want to do is, if you look at the raw data here, you'll see this JSON data file, right? So what I can do is I can just select all in Command C or Control C, copy it, and I'm going to bring it over to, and I've already done this already, so you can see that what I did is I just pasted the data in here, and now I have this list of all these guitar manufacturers, right? And so each of the, so you look at the file, and let me see, I'll maximize this a little bit more here. So if you look at this file, you can see that it is an object, right? We could just as easily put var circle equals, and then here's some properties, right? But we're not going to do that. We're going to leave this as a standard JSON file. Same format, however. You can see that we have description, source, and then companies, right? And companies, you'll see, is an array of a whole bunch of objects. It's probably, I don't know, there's probably 100 or 200 names of guitar manufacturers here. So what I'm going to do for this particular sketch is I'm going to just list out each of the guitar company's names onto our web page, and I'm going to take this URL property that accompanies the name, and I'm going to use that to create a link on our page to build an HTML file that we can then link to each of these guitar companies. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Just to familiarize you with what's going on, I'm using the same numerical format as I used in the couple of weeks prior, where this is lesson 1, so I'm calling this 1.html, and it has a corresponding 1.js file that goes with it. And then this guitars.json file, you'll see here in our week 10 directory that it's its own entity, it's its own JSON file, and we're going to load this data externally. Okay, so I'm going to close this off for now. You now hopefully understand what this file looks like under the hood, and maybe we'll look back at it later if we need to. Excuse me. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to create a page, and it's going to link to various guitar companies from our list. The way that I'm going to approach this particular problem, I'm going to start by creating a global variable that I'm calling guitars, and it's going to be the variable that holds our object, our big giant JSON data file. Okay, we're going to call that guitars, and you can then go ahead and look. And I think that we have looked at the preload function in the past. I think we looked at that when I was talking about the images, using images to accompany our objects. I think I used some Harvard extension shields and made some images that way, I think. But what we do with the preload function in Java, in P5, not in JavaScript, it's a P5 specific function, is preload's job is to load the assets that we might need for our sketch before the sketch even begins. Okay, so that way when the sketch begins, we've already got everything we need. We're not going to run into any problems with asynchronous JavaScript. And for those of you who don't know what asynchronous JavaScript means, what JavaScript is doing is it's running lines of code, and let's say if this was in setup, where we say guitars load JSON, and we had that in setup, it would try to load that line, and then it would keep on going and try to run some stuff. And for example, if we got to the following line where I'm using some information that's being taken from guitars.load, this load JSON thing, well, it's going to take a little while to load that big data file. It's going to take some number of milliseconds or whatever time it needs, especially when we go out on the web. It's going to take some time to query the web, wait for the server to respond, and then send that data over. And then, anyway, JavaScript can sort of throw up on itself if you let it, because it wants to go ahead and start running some stuff. So what would happen is we would get to this line, and it would probably say, hey, I don't know what guitars is. You're asking me for companies, and you're asking for a property of an object that's undefined, and I don't know what to do. I can't help you. So we can, at least for this video, we can avoid that snafu by doing this preload. Now what I'll show you in the next video is how we can do it using callbacks. And callbacks might sound familiar to you too from our discussion of the DOM last week. So none of this should be brand new to you. This load JSON function that I'm calling is new to you, but it's exactly like load image was from a couple of weeks ago, where we were loading those external image files to use for our object. It's the same sort of thing. So you could visualize, to use our old circle equals object analogy, if you just visualize this whole load JSON call, and then you remember what guitars.json looks like, right? So this is this object. You could picture, just visualize cutting and pasting this whole giant object, placing it right here, and assigning it to the variable guitars. That's all we're doing. It's essentially a big version of our old circle object. Okay? And what's good about this is we can access the stuff inside our JSON file in the same manner that we would have accessed circle.diameter in our small little object, right? So just to move down the lines of code here, we don't need a canvas for this particular application because, as I mentioned, all we're going to do is grab the name of the guitar company, and we're going to grab the URL, and we're going to make a paragraph element, I guess, for every object on our page, and we're going to create a link. So we're not drawing anything to the canvas yet. We're going to do that in the next video. So we don't need a canvas. This particular function you may not have seen before. It's in the reference, which, that's how I learn everything. I read the reference. But if you don't need a canvas and you don't want to draw one, just write no canvas as a function call. Otherwise, I think P5's standard default is to just draw a 100 pixel square canvas. If you don't ask it to, it'll do it by default. So that's one way to keep us from having to do that. Anyway, on to the meat of the problem. So what I'm doing here, if you look back at our guitars file, you'll see we've got this. If you can now picture essentially this on our program, even though it's not in the JSON file. So we have this guitars dot description would return this list of manufacturers, right? That would return that text. If we said guitars source, it would return this Wikipedia URL, and then guitar dot companies, right? And so what I've got here, what I want to do is I'm creating my own manufacturer's variable, and I'm assigning it guitar.companies. Well, what is guitar.companies? Let's look. The guitar.companies is, say it with me, it's an array, right? You can't say it with me, but it's an array. And as such, we know how we can handle arrays. We can do stuff with them, like loop through them or whatever, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. So let me just clean up my mess. I don't want to accidentally break a JSON file. So JSON, you probably intuitively know this, but these JSON files, the format of them is important. If you don't include these quotes for the key attributes, it's going to break. So preserving the format exactly as it should be laid out is important. And so I'm not going to be typing anything accidentally and throwing spaces and characters where they don't belong. Okay, so we have this array of guitar.companies. We're assigning it to manufacturers. So now manufacturers is an array, right? And we're going to iterate through it. We're going to go through every manufacturer, and we're going to get the name and the URL for that particular manufacturer. This code should look pretty familiar to you. What we're going to do is we're going to say for var counter variable I equals 0 up to the manufacturer's length, which means we're going to go through every element in that array. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a paragraph. And in that paragraph, I've got some HTML that I've laid out, which defines the link, with a href equals, and then I'm pasting in the value for manufacturers i.url. If we go back here, the first time through, we're going to get Alembic guitars, and that'll be the name, and the URL is alembic.com. So this will be alembic.com for element 0, and Alembic will be the name. That's all I'm doing. So I'm creating a link that highlights the name and links it to the URL. That's it. All right, so That looks really good, right? Not exactly good, because what we're going to do now is I'm going to open this in the browser and it's going to say loading, and it's never going to stop loading. It's going to be there forever. The reason for that, we can actually take a peek, and I'm going to open the console, Command Option J, I think Control Shift J on the PC side, pops open the console, and you will see I've got some error, and this is an all too familiar error that you're going to see a lot if you play around with data on the web. This is a cross, you see it sometimes called a CORS error. It's a cross origin resource sharing error, or it's cross origin requests. And what's happening here is that when it comes time to load an external file, Chrome in particular is very sensitive to external files that are loading from servers to which it doesn't have access, or servers to which you don't have access, or the servers that aren't designed to communicate with each other. And if you want to, actually, you probably should read more about it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you back to our page again, and I've got this in the link for week 10. Another thing, are you having problems or errors loading external files? Well, the solution is we've got to run a local server. And if you go through here and you link to this wiki page that I have linked for you, it will talk about these cross-origin errors. It'll give you a little bit more backstory, and then it'll give you several options for which you can run a local server if you don't already have one running on your machine. I've already got local server type things set up. So what I'm going to do, instead of trying to run this thing, where was I? Okay, trying to run this as a local file, you can see that I'm trying to call it from the file URL rather than from an HTTP, is I have a local server, development server I call DGMD E12.dev, right? This is running on my machine. It's not out in the world. But what I can do is I can link to my number one HTML page, which then calls the JavaScript and everything. And here it is. Anticlimactically, here is our list of all of the guitars that were in that JSON data file. Okay, so if we click Alembic, we'll go to the alembic.com URL, and so on down the line. What it's done, let me go back to our code. In our JavaScript here, what it's done is it's looped through every element, every one of those objects, right, in our company's array. It's grabbed this one, and then it's, whatever. You guys hopefully get it. But it's gone through every one of them. And I will show you something else that's a little bit peculiar, or is it kind of frustrating about this particular JSON data file. But you'll notice that for this property right here, country founded in, or year founded, you notice that there's some spaces here, right? So you might be thinking, well, how the heck am I going to be able to access that particular data? Because if I try to use my dot notation, and if I said something like, if I tried to do something like manufacturers dot country founded in with spaces, that's not going to work, right? So this isn't going to work. I don't know why this particular JSON file was created with spaces in it. That's something hopefully you won't see all that often, but it exists, right? When you get data from the real world, it isn't always in the pretty format that you want it to be in. So what we can do to get our way around that, I'm going to create another paragraph here that's going to list beneath the link for the manufacturer company name. I'm going to create another paragraph that says founded in, And instead of using the dot notation, what I'll use is this bracket notation that I talked about earlier, okay? So manufacturer's sub I, index I, is just what you think it would be. It's the first object in the array. And then rather than using dot country founded in, what I can do to get around that is I can use this bracket with quotes and then put in the name of my key within those quotes. Okay, so if you look at country founded in within brackets, that's entirely equivalent to dot notation. Okay, so if, for example, if we wanted to do manufacturer's I instead of dot URL, we could put bracket quotes URL. That would do the same thing. Okay, so that's just a new syntactical piece of sugar for you. You don't see it all that often, but it's out there for sure. So I'm going to save this up now. I'm going to go back to my page, and what we should now see if everything worked well. Okay, yeah, Alembic founded in the United States, whatever, founded in Germany, founded in Australia. Okay, founded in undefined. I guess that one didn't have a excuse me, that one didn't have a property for where it was founded. So I don't know particularly what happened there. That one might not have had a URL either. I'm just checking at this point. Whether it works or not is entirely up to the JSON data. Our job is done. We connected the file and we made the thing work. So that is about it. I hope that, this is a bit of a whirlwind tour. Again, if you want a little bit more of a step by step, a little bit more slowly, you can dig into the Schiffman videos. And his example uses a very similar data file. I think he does something with birds that is pretty similar. And that is about it. So now at this point, you should feel at least comfortable or conceptually be able to understand that we are able to access an external data file via this load JSON call, and we are able to parse through it using our tried and true dot syntax and this new bracket notation that I've shown you. In the next video, we're going to take the degree of difficulty up a step, and we're going to talk about how we can get this JSON data when it's being served from an API, and we'll talk about what an API is and all of that in the next spot.